The autumn of 1946 settles over Denmark like a heavy gray blanket, carrying with it the lingering scars of 5 years under Nazi occupation. The countryside bears witness to a nation struggling to heal broken bridges, rebuilt with mismatched materials, farmhouses with bullet holes still peppering their walls, and fields where unexploded ordnance sleeps beneath the frost-covered earth. This is a land caught between the nightmare it survived and the uncertain peace it now inhabits. A military transport truck rumbles along the cobblestone road leading to Elsinore, its olive green paint chipped and faded from years of wartime service. Behind the wheel sits Captain Hamlet Kronborg, 28 years old, his gaunt face bearing the weathered marks of a man who has seen too much death in too few years. His Danish army uniform is crisp but worn, the insignia of his rank polished to military precision, yet his eyes hold the distant stare of someone still fighting battles that ended months ago. The truck's engine coughs and sputters as it climbs the final hill before the town, black smoke trailing behind like the ghosts of burned villages. Through the cracked windshield, Hamlet watches his homeland unfold before him, a patchwork of destruction and desperate reconstruction. Red-tiled roofs patched, with whatever materials could be found. Church steeples standing sentinel over graveyards that grew too large too quickly. And everywhere the Danish flag flying proudly from poles that remember when different colors snapped in these same winds. Elsinore Castle emerges from the morning mist like a stone sentinel, its ancient towers now serving as the headquarters of the Danish Provisional Government. The medieval fortress that once guarded the narrow strait between Denmark and Sweden has been transformed into a center of political power, its halls echoing with the voices of men trying to rebuild a nation from the ashes of occupation. Scaffolding clings to the castle's eastern wall, where German artillery had left its mark during the final days of the war. Hamlet downshifts as he approaches the checkpoint at the castle's main gate. 2 Danish soldiers, barely out of their teens, step forward with the cautious efficiency of men who learned too young that survival depends on suspicion. Their rifles are British Lee Enfields, part of the Allied supplies that helped arm the resistance during the dark years. One soldier examines Hamlet's military identification, while the other peers into the truck's empty cargo bed. Captain Kronborg, the first soldier says, his voice carrying the accent of rural Jutland. "You're expected, sir. Colonel Marcellus is waiting for you in the command center." The massive wooden gates, reinforced with steel plates welded on during the occupation years, creak open to admit the truck. Hamlet drives through the courtyard where Danish resistance fighters once gathered in secret, where collaborators met their fate, and where his father, Major Erik Kronborg, had planned the operations that helped drive the Wehrmacht from Danish soil. But Major Erik Kronborg is dead now, killed in what the official reports call a tragic automobile accident just 3 weeks after Denmark's liberation. The funeral had been a hero's ceremony, attended by provisional government officials and Allied commanders. But Hamlet remembers the questions that were never asked, the investigation that was never conducted, and the unseemly speed with which his uncle Claudius assumed his father's position in the provisional government. The command center occupies what was once the castle's great hall, its vaulted ceiling now strung with telephone wires and radio cables. Maps of Denmark cover every wall, marked with colored pins indicating reconstruction projects, displaced persons camps, and suspected cells of Nazi sympathizers who melted into the civilian population when the war ended. The air carries the smell of cigarette smoke, mimeograph ink, and the coffee that keeps exhausted officials functioning on 3 hours of sleep. Colonel Marcellus rises from behind a desk constructed from ammunition crates and salvaged lumber. He is a man of 60, his white mustache neatly trimmed in the style of the old Danish army, his uniform bearing the ribbons of 2 world wars and the underground resistance. His handshake is firm, but his eyes avoid Hamlet's direct gaze. "Welcome home, Captain," Marcellus says, his voice carefully modulated. "Denmark has need of experienced officers like yourself. Your service with the Allied forces in Germany was exemplary." Hamlet accepts the formal greeting but senses the undercurrents of tension in the older man's manner. Behind Marcellus, a radio operator wearing British headphones monitors communications from across the country. The static-filled voices speak of food shortages, refugee movements, and the delicate work of rooting out war criminals who hope to disappear into the chaos of reconstruction. "I came as soon as I received word about my father," Hamlet says, his voice steady but strained. The telegram said accident, but provided no details. Marcellus turns to study a map of Copenhagen harbor, his hands clasped behind his back in military fashion. Your father was driving to a late-night meeting with provisional government officials. The roads were dark, still damaged from the fighting. His car left the road near Kronborg Point, went through the barrier, and into the Sound. By the time local fishermen pulled him out, he lets the sentence hang unfinished. The explanation sounds rehearsed, too neat for the chaos that defines everything else in this shattered country. Hamlet studies the colonel's profile, noting the slight tremor in his jaw that suggests suppressed emotion or carefully hidden guilt. Who was he meeting? Hamlet asks. What was so urgent that it couldn't wait for morning? Before Marcellus can answer, footsteps echo through the hall. Claudius Kronborg enters with the confident stride of a man accustomed to command, his civilian clothes marking him as one of the provisional government's political appointees rather than a military officer. At 45, he possesses the same strong Danish features as his late brother, but where Eric had been a soldier's soldier, rough-hewn and direct, Claudius moves with the smooth calculation of a politician. Behind him walks Gertrude Kronborg, Hamlet's mother, her 40-year-old beauty now tempered by the grief and stress of occupation years. Her simple black dress and minimal jewelry speak to the austerity of wartime, but her posture remains erect with the dignity of a woman who endured 5 years of fear and emerged unbroken. The gold wedding ring on her left hand catches the light streaming through the tall windows, a new ring, Hamlet realizes with a start, different from the one his father had placed there 25 years ago. My dear nephew, Claudius says, embracing Hamlet with practiced warmth. Denmark rejoices in your safe return. Your father would be so proud of your service to our allies, your contribution to our liberation. The embrace lasts a moment too long, and Hamlet catches the scent of expensive aftershave, a luxury that speaks of black market connections in a country still rationing soap. When Claudius steps back, his eyes hold the calculating look of a man measuring another's strengths and weaknesses. Gertrude approaches her son with tears threatening to spill from her eyes. Her embrace is desperate, clinging, as if she fears he might disappear like so many others have disappeared in these terrible years. My son, she whispers against his shoulder. My dear son, finally home. But even in his mother's arms, Hamlet cannot shake the feeling that he has returned to a Denmark where nothing is as it seems, where the war's end brought not peace, but a different kind of conflict. The castle walls that once protected the kingdom now seem to conceal secrets, and the family that should offer comfort feels like a nest of strangers wearing familiar faces. Outside, the wind from the Sound carries the cry of seagulls and the distant sound of reconstruction work. Denmark rebuilding itself brick by brick, life by life, truth by buried truth. The provisional government offices occupy the castle's former royal chambers, their ornate tapestries now sharing wall space with military communications equipment and maps marked with reconstruction priorities. Claudius guides the small family gathering toward a conference room, where afternoon light filters through windows that still bear tape marks from blackout precautions. The table, scarred by years of hasty meetings and urgent decisions, holds a tea service that speaks of Denmark's attempt to reclaim civilian normalcy. Your father's work with the resistance was invaluable, Claudius begins, pouring tea with the careful ceremony of a man who understands the importance of maintaining appearances. But the strain of 5 years underground, the constant fear, the weight of commanding men who might not see another dawn, it took a toll on his health that perhaps we all underestimated. Gertrude nods, her fingers worrying the edge of her handkerchief. He had been having trouble sleeping, terrible headaches. The doctor said his blood pressure was dangerously high. We all begged him to rest. But you know how your father was about duty. Hamlet accepts the delicate china cup, noting how his mother avoids his eyes when speaking of his father's final weeks. Through the window, he can see Danish workers clearing rubble from the courtyard, their methodical labor, a stark contrast to the carefully orchestrated conversation taking place in this room. The night he died, Hamlet says quietly, he was driving to a meeting. Who was he meeting? What was so important? Claudius exchanges a quick glance with Marcellus, who has remained standing near the window like a sentry. Intelligence matters, Claudius replies. We had received word of a potential Nazi sabotage cell, former SS officers who had gone to ground when the Wehrmacht withdrew. Your father was coordinating the response with our Allied liaisons. The explanation sounds plausible, even necessary, but something in Claudius's tone suggests rehearsed lines rather than spontaneous recollection. Hamlet sets down his teacup with deliberate precision, the small clink of porcelain against porcelain unnaturally loud in the suddenly quiet room. A knock at the door interrupts the tension. A young lieutenant enters and salutes crisply. "Sir, there's a gentleman here requesting to see Captain Kronborg. Says he's an old university friend, Lieutenant Horatio Anderson, recently discharged from Allied intelligence." Hamlet's heart lifts for the first time since entering the castle. Horatio, his closest friend from Copenhagen University, the only person who knew him before the war, transformed them all into different people. If anyone could help him navigate the treacherous waters of family secrets and political intrigue, it would be Horatio. "Send him in immediately," Hamlet says, rising from his chair. Horatio Anderson enters the room like a man who has learned to move carefully through dangerous spaces. At 29, he carries himself with the lean alertness of someone who survived 5 years gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. His civilian clothes are well-tailored but worn, and his eyes hold the particular wariness of a man who learned that survival depends on noticing what others miss. The reunion is warm but brief, two friends embracing, while aware that others watch and listen. Horatio's handshake lingers a moment longer than protocol demands, and Hamlet catches the slight pressure that speaks of urgent secrets to be shared in private. "My condolences on your father's death," Horatio says formally, but his eyes convey a different message entirely. Major Kronborg was a true patriot. His loss is felt throughout the resistance network. Claudius steps forward with political smoothness. "Mr. Anderson, we appreciate your service to Denmark during these difficult years. I trust you're finding civilian life agreeable after so long in irregular circumstances?" The question carries undertones that make Hamlet's jaw tighten. Horatio meets Claudius's gaze steadily. "Civilian life has its own challenges, sir. Sometimes the most dangerous enemies are those who hide in plain sight." The comment hangs in the air like cordite smoke. Gertrude rises abruptly, her teacup rattling against its saucer. "Perhaps we should allow you boys to catch up," she says, her voice strained. "Claudius, we have that meeting with the Reconstruction Committee in 20 minutes. As his family and Colonel Marcellus file out of the room, Hamlet notices the way Claudius's hand rests possessively on his mother's lower back, a gesture that speaks of intimate familiarity. The door closes behind them with the soft finality of secrets being sealed away. Alone with Horatio, Hamlet feels the careful mask he has worn since arriving at Elsinore begin to slip. "My friend," he says quietly, "I fear I am drowning in questions with no one willing to provide answers." Horatio moves to the window, scanning the courtyard below with the automatic vigilance of a former intelligence operative. "Your father didn't die in any automobile accident," he says without preamble. "I was in contact with him the week before his death. He had discovered something that made him fear for his life and doubt the loyalty of those closest to him." The words hit Hamlet like physical blows. He grips the back of a chair, his knuckles white against the dark wood. What did he discover? He suspected that someone in the provisional government was feeding information to former Nazi officials, helping war criminals escape justice. He had evidence documents, photographs, recorded conversations. He was preparing to expose a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the new Danish administration. Horatio turns from the window, his face grave in the afternoon light. "The night before he died, your father contacted me through our old resistance channels. He said he had finally identified the traitor and that the revelation would shock the entire country. He was planning to present his evidence to the Allied authorities the following morning." Hamlet feels the room spinning around him as the implications sink in. And now he's dead, and that evidence has disappeared. "Not all of it," Horatio says, reaching into his jacket to withdraw a small metal key. "Your father gave me this 3 days before his death. He said it opened a safety deposit box in Copenhagen, and that if anything happened to him, I should give it only to you." The key is small and ordinary, the kind used by banks throughout Denmark, but in Hamlet's palm it feels heavy as a weapon. Outside, the sound of reconstruction work continues, hammers and saws building a new Denmark on the foundation of the old. But here in this room, with shadows lengthening across the conference table and his friend's revelations echoing in his mind, Hamlet realizes that his personal war is just beginning. The afternoon light fades as clouds gather over the sound, and somewhere in the castle's ancient corridors, footsteps echo with the measured pace of men who carry deadly secrets. Denmark may be free from Nazi occupation, but Hamlet is beginning to understand that some prisons are built not by foreign enemies, but by those who share your blood and call you family. The Copenhagen Merchants' Bank stands like a fortress of Danish resilience in the heart of the capital, its neoclassical facade pocked with shrapnel scars, but still radiating the solidity of old money and older secrets. 2 hours by military transport from Elsinore, the city bears the visible wounds of occupation, broken windows patched with cardboard, scorch marks on building walls, and, everywhere, the Danish flag flying defiantly from improvised poles. But beneath the surface damage, Copenhagen pulses with the desperate energy of a nation rebuilding itself one transaction at a time. Hamlet and Horatio enter the bank's marble lobby, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space where crystal chandeliers, miraculously intact, cast fractured light across walls lined with portraits of Danish financial titans. The bank manager, a thin man with wire-rimmed spectacles and the nervous demeanor of someone who survived 5 years of economic uncertainty, examines the key with the reverence of a priest handling relics. Box 847, he confirms, leading them down a staircase into the vault's basement levels. Your father was most particular about the security arrangements. Only he possessed a key, and he left specific instructions that access was to be granted solely to his son in the event of his death. The safety deposit box vault stretches into shadows, broken by bare electric bulbs, rows of metal boxes holding the secrets and treasures of Copenhagen's surviving elite. Box 847 sits in the vault's deepest recess, as if Major Kronborg had chosen concealment over convenience, even in death. The key turns with mechanical precision, and the metal door swings open to reveal contents that make Hamlet's breath catch in his throat. Photographs, dozens of them, showing Danish officials meeting with men in civilian clothes whose faces Hamlet recognizes from Allied intelligence briefings on wanted war criminals. Documents bearing SS letterheads and provisional government seals. Bank transfer records showing payments to numbered Swiss accounts. And at the bottom of the box, a journal in his father's careful handwriting, its pages filled with dates, names, and damning observations. Horatio examines the photographs with the trained eye of an intelligence operative. Your uncle appears in at least a dozen of these images, he says quietly. Meeting with former Wehrmacht logistics officers who supposedly died during the German retreat. Hamlet opens his father's journal to a page marked with a red ribbon, reading aloud in a voice that grows steadier with each revelation. October 15, 1946, final confirmation received. The Valkyrie network extends deeper than suspected, Danish officials providing new identities and escape routes to high-value Nazi personnel in exchange for gold looted from occupied territories. Claudius is not merely complicit, he appears to be coordinating the entire operation from within the provisional government. The implications strike Hamlet like hammer blows. His uncle, his father's own brother, not just a traitor to Denmark, but the architect of a conspiracy that allowed war criminals to escape justice while Danish resistance fighters were still being buried in heroes' graves. There's more, Horatio says, lifting a manila envelope from the box's bottom. Inside are architectural drawings of the Elsinore Castle grounds, marked with guard rotations and security protocols. Red ink circles the route his father would have taken on the night of his death, and handwritten notes detail the timing that would have been necessary for the accident to occur exactly where it did. He knew, Hamlet whispers. He knew they were going to kill him, and he documented everything. The bank manager, who has been discreetly examining his pocket watch, clears his throat nervously. Gentlemen, I must remind you that the bank closes in 30 minutes, and the evening curfew remains in effect throughout the city. They gather the evidence carefully, Hamlet placing each photograph and document in his military dispatch case with the reverence of a man handling his father's legacy. As they prepare to leave the vault, footsteps echo in the corridor above, heavy boots moving with military precision through the bank's main floor. Through the vault's small window, Hamlet sees German shepherds straining against their leashes, while Danish police officers examine identity papers with the thorough efficiency of men following orders. The sight sends ice through his veins, either coincidence or evidence that their investigation has already been discovered. Back entrance, Horatio murmurs. his wartime instincts taking control. They move through the vault's service corridors, past furnaces and storage rooms that smell of coal dust and fear, emerging into an alley where refuse bins overflow with the detritus of a city still learning to live normally. The evening air carries the salt scent of the harbor mixed with smoke from chimneys where families burn whatever they can find for warmth. As they walk toward Horatio's borrowed motorcycle, Hamlet notices a figure in the shadows across the street, an old man in a tattered coat, watching them with eyes that hold recognition and terror in equal measure. "That man," Hamlet says quietly. "He's been following us since we left the bank." Horatio follows his gaze and stiffens with sudden recognition. "Bernardo Olson, former night watchman at Elsinore Castle. He was on duty the night your father died, but he disappeared the following morning before anyone could question him properly." The old watchman crosses the street with the careful steps of someone who has spent months in hiding. His face is gaunt with malnutrition and stress, his clothes the cast-offs of charity organizations, but his eyes burn with the desperate need to unburden himself of secrets that have been consuming him from within. "Captain Kronborg," he whispers, using a voice roughened by fear and sleepless nights. "I knew your father. Good man, honest man. They killed him because he would not be bought." The words hang in the evening air like the tolling of funeral bells. Around them, Copenhagen settles into night windows glowing with precious electric light, the distant sound of jazz music from illegal clubs, the ever-present rumble of Allied transport vehicles maintaining order in a nation still learning to trust its own government. "I saw them that night," Bernardo continues, his voice gaining strength with each confession. "Saw your uncle and two men I didn't recognize tampering with the major's automobile. Cut the brake lines. Loosened the steering mechanism. Made it look like mechanical failure, but I was there. I saw everything." The revelation hits Hamlet with the force of absolute certainty. His father's death was not accident or illness, but cold, calculated murder. The family that should have offered comfort in his grief has instead offered him lies wrapped in false sympathy. The Denmark he fought to liberate harbors enemies, more dangerous than those who wore foreign uniforms. In the distance, church bells toll the evening hour, their bronze voices calling across a city where justice and betrayal walk hand in hand through streets that remember too much blood. The safe house sits in the ruins of Copenhagen's old Jewish quarter, a three-story building that survived the Nazi occupation through a combination of luck and the courage of neighbors who painted over Hebrew inscriptions and claimed the property belonged to Danish Christians. Now it serves as temporary housing for displaced persons and, in its basement, as an unofficial archive for resistance documents that the provisional government prefers to forget. Hamlet descends the narrow wooden stairs, each step creaking under the weight of evidence that could topple the fragile Danish government. The basement smells of mildew and old paper, illuminated by bare bulbs that cast harsh shadows across filing cabinets salvaged from bombed offices. Here, in this underground repository of secrets, Denmark's true war history is being preserved by volunteers who understand that memory is the only weapon against future betrayals. At a makeshift desk constructed from ammunition crates and salvage doors, a young woman sits hunched over a typewriter, her fingers moving with practiced efficiency across keys worn smooth by countless desperate messages. Ophelia Poulsen, 24 years old, possesses the serious beauty of someone who came of age during wartime, high cheekbones sharpened by years of rationed food, intelligent eyes that learned too early to recognize danger, and prematurely gray streaks in her brown hair that speak of stress beyond her years. She looks up as Hamlet approaches, her expression shifting from professional courtesy to genuine concern as she recognizes the haunted look in his eyes. Around her, boxes overflow with resistance communications, testimonies from concentration camp survivors, and personnel files on Danish collaborators who melted back into civilian life when the war ended. "Captain Kronborg," she says, setting aside the document she was transcribing, "Horatio told me you might need access to our archives. I'm sorry about your father. He was one of the few provisional government officials who truly understood what we're trying to preserve here." Her voice carries the soft accent of educated Copenhagen, but underneath lies the steel that allowed her to survive 5 years as a courier for the resistance, carrying messages between underground cells, while Nazi patrols searched every shadow for Danish patriots. Hamlet places his dispatch case on the desk, with the careful precision of someone handling explosives. Miss Polson, I believe my father discovered something that cost him his life. I need to understand how deep this conspiracy reaches, and who else might be involved. Ophelia opens the case and examines its contents with the trained eye of someone who has spent 2 years cataloging the evidence of Danish collaboration. Her face pales as she recognizes faces in the photographs, men who now hold positions in the provisional government, respected citizens whose wartime activities were conveniently forgotten in the rush toward national reconciliation. The Valkyrie Network, she whispers, her fingers tracing the edges of photographs that show Danish officials meeting with wanted war criminals. We've been tracking them for months, but we could never prove the connection to the provisional government. Your father's documentation is the missing link we needed. She moves to a filing cabinet marked with resistance symbols, retrieving a thick folder bound with string. Inside are hundreds of documents, intercepted communications, witness testimonies, financial records that trace the flow of Nazi gold through Danish banks and into numbered Swiss accounts. Your uncle isn't just helping war criminals escape, Ophelia explains, spreading documents across the desk like tarot cards, revealing an ominous future. He's organizing an entire shadow economy built on stolen wealth and blood money. Former SS officers are being given new identities as Danish businessmen, using looted gold to buy influence in the reconstruction effort. Through the basement's small windows, the sounds of evening Copenhagen filter down the rattle of streetcars, resuming normal schedules. The laughter of children playing in bomb craters that have become playgrounds. The distant music from dance halls, where young people try to forget the darkness they've survived. But here in this underground archive, the war continues in filing cabinets and whispered testimonies. Hamlet studies a photograph showing his uncle Claudius shaking hands with a man identified as former Oberfuhrer Heinrich Zimmer, officially dead in the Berlin bunker, but clearly alive and well in Copenhagen. How many people know about this evidence? Too few, Ophelia replies, her voice heavy with the weight of dangerous knowledge. The Allied authorities are focused on the major war criminals, the names everyone recognizes. They don't want to destabilize friendly governments by investigating every mid-level collaborator. Denmark needs stability more than it needs justice. Or so they tell us. The bitter truth hangs between them like smoke from burning documents. In the weeks since liberation, Denmark has chosen the comfort of collective amnesia over the pain of complete honesty. Former resistance fighters have been quietly asked to forget certain names, certain faces, certain betrayals, all in the service of national unity and reconstruction. A footstep on the stairs above makes them both freeze. Ophelia quickly gathers the most damning photographs, sliding them into a hidden compartment behind a false filing cabinet back. The basement falls silent, except for the steady drip of water from pipes damaged during the war and never properly repaired. Horatio appears at the bottom of the stairs, his face grim with urgent news. We need to leave immediately. Word has reached Claudius about your visit to the bank. There are military patrols searching the Jewish quarter, ostensibly looking for black market operators, but they're asking specifically about Captain Kronborg. The net is tightening around them with the inexorable precision of a military operation. Hamlet realizes that his uncle's network extends deeper than family betrayal. It encompasses police units, military commands, and government departments that should be protecting Danish citizens, but are instead protecting Danish traitors. There's a tunnel, Ophelia says, moving toward the basement's far wall where a bookshelf conceals an entrance to the old sewer system. It connects to the resistance network we used during the occupation. It will take us to the harbor district without going through the main streets. As they prepare to disappear into Copenhagen's underground, Hamlet takes one last look at the archive that holds Denmark's suppressed memories. Somewhere in these files are the names of every collaborator, every betrayal, every compromise that allowed evil to flourish while good men died. His father's evidence is now part of this larger truth, a truth that powerful men will kill to keep buried. The tunnel entrance yawns before them like the mouth of history itself, dark and uncertain but leading toward a reckoning that can no longer be avoided. Above, the sound of military boots on cobblestones grows closer, and Denmark's carefully maintained peace begins to crack under the weight of its own contradictions. The sewer tunnels beneath Copenhagen stretch like arteries through the city's underground anatomy, their brick walls blackened by decades of industrial runoff and wartime explosions. Water drips steadily from joints weakened by Allied bombing raids, creating pools that reflect the pale light from Horatio's electric torch. The air carries the metallic taste of rust and decay, mixed with the lingering chemical residue of explosives that once transformed these passages into lifelines for hunted resistance fighters. Ophelia moves through the tunnels with the confident stride of someone who knows every branch and junction by heart. Her practical boots splash through ankle-deep water, while she navigates by memory and instinct, leading them away from the Jewish quarter toward the harbor district, where Danish fishing boats still bear the scars of German coastal batteries. During the occupation, these tunnels carried more than sewage, she explains, her voice echoing off the curved walls. Messages, weapons, people, anything the resistance needed to move without Nazi detection. My brother helped map every passage before he was captured and sent to Theresienstadt. The mention of her brother hangs in the damp air like an unfinished prayer. Hamlet knows that Theresienstadt was called a model ghetto by Nazi propaganda, but the resistance networks had long ago learned the truth about the trains that arrived full and departed empty. Another debt that Denmark's new government prefers not to calculate too precisely. Behind them, the distant sound of military boots on cobblestones grows fainter as the patrol searches streets they have already abandoned. But Hamlet knows that his uncle's reach extends beyond uniformed soldiers. The Valkyrie network has had months to establish informants throughout Copenhagen's working districts, creating a web of watchers who report suspicious activity to men who wear civilian clothes but carry military authority. They emerge through a drainage grate into an alley behind the Nyhavn harbor, where colorful townhouses stand like painted sentries along the canal. The evening fog rolls in from the Sound, carrying with it the salt smell of the sea and the diesel fumes from fishing boats returning with their meager catches. Here, in the shadow of buildings that housed German naval officers during the occupation, Denmark's maritime industry struggles to rebuild itself with boats that remember when they flew different flags. Horatio leads them to a safe house above a ship chandler's shop, climbing external stairs that creak under their combined weight. The apartment belongs to Rasmus Gildenkrantz, a former resistance operative who now works as a liaison between the provisional government and the Allied shipping authorities. The main room serves as both living space and intelligence center, its walls covered with charts of Danish coastal waters and lists of vessels requesting entry permits. Gildenkrantz himself is a compact man of 40, his weathered face bearing the permanent squint of someone who spent the war years watching horizons for enemy ships. He greets them with the cautious warmth of a professional conspirator, offering coffee brewed from beans that arrived through channels he prefers not to discuss. Captain Kronborg, he says, settling into a chair that faces both the harbor window and the apartment's only exit. Your uncle has been asking questions about your activities. Not official questions, the kind that come through resistance channels, from people who owe him favors. The implications chill Hamlet more than the evening fog seeping through the apartment's ill-fitting windows. Claudius is using the same networks that once protected Danish patriots to hunt those who threaten his conspiracy. The infrastructure of resistance has become the machinery of suppression. How much time do we have? Hamlet asks, studying harbor charts that show shipping lanes where German U-boats once hunted Allied convoys. Not much, Gildenkrantz replies grimly. Word is that Claudius has convinced the Allied authorities that you're suffering from combat fatigue. That your accusations against the provisional government are the delusions of a traumatized veteran who can't accept his father's death. The strategy is brilliant in its simplicity. Discredit the accuser by questioning his mental state, a tactic that plays perfectly into Allied concerns about veteran readjustment and political stability. Who would believe the wild theories of a shell-shocked soldier against the word of respected government officials? Through the harbor window, Hamlet watches Danish longshoremen unloading cargo from a Swedish freighter, their work illuminated by electric lights that cast harsh shadows across the dock. Among the workers, he notices several men whose posture and bearing suggest military training despite their civilian clothes watchers placed by his uncle to monitor traffic through Copenhagen's ports. Ophelia spreads her archive documents across Gildenkrantz's table, creating a paper mosaic of betrayal and complicity. We need to get this evidence to Allied intelligence officers who can't be bought or intimidated, she says. Men who served with the resistance and understand what's at stake. There's a problem, Gildenkrantz interjects, his voice heavy with the weight of unwelcome knowledge. Major Patterson, The British intelligence liaison who was coordinating with your father died in a car accident 2 days ago. Lieutenant Morrison, the American officer who was investigating collaboration networks, has been transferred suddenly to occupied Germany. The Allied personnel who might have acted on your evidence are disappearing or being reassigned. The scope of Claudius's influence becomes clear, reaching not just through Danish institutions but into the Allied administrative structure that governs post-war Europe. The Valkyrie network has had months to identify threats and eliminate them with the efficiency of a military operation. A coded knock at the apartment door makes everyone freeze 3 short raps, 2 long, 1 short. Gildenkrantz moves to answer, his hand resting on the pistol concealed beneath his civilian jacket. The man who enters wears the rough clothes of a harbor worker, but his eyes hold the sharp awareness of someone accustomed to danger. "Message from the docks," he reports in the clipped accent of rural Jutland. Danish police and military units are setting up checkpoints at all major transportation hubs. Official word is, they're searching for black market smugglers, but they're carrying photographs of specific individuals. He produces 3 photographs from his coat pocket, grainy images that nevertheless clearly show Hamlet, Horatio, and Ophelia taken earlier that day near the Copenhagen bank. The speed with which their images were obtained and distributed speaks to resources and coordination that extend far beyond normal police procedures. "Your uncle has declared you enemies of the state," the messenger continues. "Wanted for theft of classified documents and conspiracy to destabilize the provisional government. There's a reward posted enough to make any patriotic citizen eager to report suspicious activity." The trap is closing with mechanical precision, transforming them from investigators into fugitives, from patriots seeking justice into criminals threatening Denmark's fragile stability. In the space of 24 hours, they have discovered the truth about Major Kronborg's murder and found themselves marked for death by the same conspiracy that killed him. Outside, the fog thickens over Copenhagen harbor, wrapping the city in a gray shroud that conceals sins and secrets in equal measure. Somewhere in that mist, Danish citizens who survived 5 years of occupation now hunt their own countrymen on behalf of the very forces they once fought to defeat. The abandoned brewery on Copenhagen's outskirts stands like a monument to Denmark's interrupted prosperity, its brick smokestacks reaching toward a sky heavy with the promise of winter snow. Once, this facility produced the lager that Danish workers drank after shifts in shipyards and steel mills. Now its empty fermentation tanks serve as echo chambers for the footsteps of hunted men, and its loading docks provide concealment for activities that the provisional government would prefer to ignore. Hamlet crouches behind a row of wooden barrels, their contents long since drained, listening to the sound of military vehicles circling the industrial district. Through gaps in the brewery's boarded windows, he can see the sweep of searchlights cutting through the November darkness, methodically probing every shadow where fugitives might hide. The manhunt has expanded beyond Copenhagen's city center, transforming the entire capital region into a web of checkpoints and patrols. Beside him, Ophelia clutches a leather satchel containing copies of the most damning evidence, photographs and documents that could expose the Valkyrie network's operations across Scandinavia. Her face, illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through broken skylights, shows the strain of 16 hours spent moving through a city that has become hostile territory for those who know too much about Danish collaboration. "We can't keep running indefinitely," she whispers, her breath visible in the cold air that seeps through the brewery's deteriorating walls. "Claudius has turned half of Copenhagen into informants. Every resistance contact we try to reach has either disappeared or refuses to meet." The truth of her words settles over them like the industrial dust that coats every surface in this abandoned place. The Denmark they fought to liberate has become a prison where those who survived the Nazi occupation now hunt each other on behalf of men who profited from Danish suffering. Horatio returns from his reconnaissance of the brewery's perimeter, his military training evident in the careful silence of his movement. His face carries news that requires no words. They are surrounded, trapped in a building that offers concealment, but no escape route that isn't already watched by men with orders to shoot first and investigate later. 36 military police, he reports in barely audible tones. Danish units, but coordinated by someone with German tactical training. They're not just searching, they're conducting a siege operation designed to flush us out or force us to surrender. The observation strikes Hamlet with the force of recognition. His uncle's conspiracy doesn't just employ former Nazi officials as facilitators and middlemen, it uses their expertise to eliminate threats with the same efficiency once applied to resistance fighters and concentration camp inmates. The Valkyrie network has transformed Denmark's liberation into an occupation by different masters wearing familiar faces. A vehicle engine grows louder outside, accompanied by the crunch of tires on gravel and the sharp commands of officers positioning their units. Through a crack in the boarding, Hamlet sees a black sedan flanked by military trucks, their headlights creating a pool of harsh illumination in the brewery's loading yard. From the sedan emerges a figure he recognizes with bitter certainty. Claudius himself, wrapped in a wool overcoat that speaks of comfort and authority, come to personally oversee the capture of his nephew. Hamlet. Claudius's voice carries clearly through the November air, amplified by a military bullhorn. I know you're in there. You and your misguided friends have caused enough trouble for one evening. Come out now, and we can resolve this as a family matter. The words drip with false concern, the same tone Claudius used when expressing sympathy for Hamlet's grief and offering guidance through his bereavement. But here, surrounded by armed men in the ruins of Denmark's industrial past, the mask finally slips to reveal the calculating killer beneath. Your father was a good soldier. Claudius continues, his amplified voice echoing off the brewery's empty walls, but he never understood that war requires compromise, that peace demands practical accommodations with former enemies. The evidence you think you've discovered tells only part of a larger story, a story of Danish survival through the darkest period in our nation's history. The justification is smooth, practiced, the rhetoric of a man who has spent months crafting explanations for collaboration and betrayal. To hear Claudius tell it, helping Nazi war criminals escape justice becomes a patriotic duty, and murder becomes mercy killing of a man too naive to understand political necessity. Ophelia's hand finds Hamlet's in the darkness, her fingers cold but steady. There's a drainage tunnel under the main fermentation tank. She whispers. It connects to the city storm system. We used it during the war to move supplies when the brewery was commandeered by German logistics units. But even as she outlines their escape route, all three of them understand the larger implications of their situation. Running will save their lives but accomplish nothing else. The evidence they carry means nothing if they can't find anyone willing to act on it. And every Allied contact capable of investigating Claudius's conspiracy has been eliminated or compromised. I won't run anymore, Hamlet says, his voice carrying the quiet finality of a decision that has been building since he first saw his father's body in the castle morgue. My father died fighting these bastards, and I won't dishonor his memory by spending my life hiding in sewers and abandoned buildings. He stands, moving toward the brewery's main entrance with the steady gait of a soldier reporting for a mission from which he doesn't expect to return. Behind him, Horatio and Ophelia exchange glances that speak of loyalty stronger than self-preservation and love deeper than personal safety. The loading dock doors creak open on hinges, corroded by years of neglect, and Hamlet steps into the harsh pool of light created by military searchlights. Around him, Danish soldiers raise their rifles with the mechanical precision of men following orders they don't question, their faces hidden behind the shadows cast by military helmets. Uncle, Hamlet calls out, his voice carrying across the industrial wasteland with the authority of a man who has nothing left to lose. Let's discuss this family matter properly. Man to man, without hiding behind the uniforms of patriots who died believing they were fighting for Danish freedom. Claudius approaches with the confident stride of someone accustomed to controlling dangerous situations. Up close, his face shows the strain of months spent maintaining his conspiracy against investigators who won't stop asking inconvenient questions. Behind his diplomatic smile lurks the exhaustion of a man who discovered that murdering his brother was easier than living with the consequences. My dear nephew, Claudius says, dismissing the soldiers with a gesture that sends them backing away, but keeping their weapons trained on the three fugitives. You've always been too idealistic, too willing to see the world in absolutes of right and wrong. Your father had the same weakness, the inability to understand that survival sometimes requires moral flexibility. The fog rolling in from Copenhagen harbor swirls around the brewery's abandoned grounds, creating a gray curtain that seems to separate this confrontation from the rest of Denmark. Somewhere beyond that curtain, Ordinary citizens sleep in beds they believe are secure, protected by a government they trust to act in their best interests. They do not know that their liberation has become another kind of captivity, administered by men who learned efficiency from their former enemies. The standoff in the brewery's loading yard stretches like a held breath, each second heavy with the potential for violence that will shatter Denmark's carefully maintained facade of post-war normalcy. Searchlights create harsh pools of white light that transform the industrial ruins into a theater stage where truth and lies will finally clash without the protective cushion of diplomatic language and political necessity. Claudius circles his nephew with the calculated movements of a predator assessing wounded prey, his expensive overcoat incongruous against the backdrop of rusted machinery and crumbling brick. Behind him, Danish soldiers maintain their positions with weapons trained on 3 people who, until this morning, were considered patriots and heroes of the resistance struggle. Your father discovered my arrangement with certain former German officers, Claudius continues, his voice carrying the conversational tone of a man explaining routine business transactions. He was going to expose operations that have successfully relocated over 200 high-value personnel who possess technical knowledge essential to Denmark's reconstruction efforts. The euphemisms flow like honey over broken glass, former German officers instead of war criminals, high-value personnel instead of SS murderers, reconstruction efforts instead of blood money laundered through Swiss banks. Hamlet recognizes the language of bureaucratic evil. The same phrases that once justified deportations and executions under the banner of administrative efficiency. You're talking about men who operated death camps, Hamlet replies, his voice steady despite the rifle barrels pointed at his chest. Officers who executed Danish resistance fighters. Officials who looted Jewish businesses and sent families to die in cattle cars. These are the people you're protecting? A slight smile plays across Claudius's lips, the expression of a teacher correcting a naive student's misunderstanding of complex realities. I'm talking about engineers who designed Atlantic Wall fortifications that we're now converting to coastal defense systems. Logistics experts who understand supply chain management for large-scale industrial projects. Intelligence officers whose knowledge of Soviet operations will be essential as the Cold War develops. The justification is seductive in its pragmatic logic, evil transformed into expertise, murder rebranded as human resources management. In the harsh light of the search lamps, Hamlet sees how his uncle has rationalized collaboration into patriotism, turning Denmark's liberation into another form of occupation administered by more sophisticated masters. From the shadows beyond the light, footsteps approach with military precision. A figure emerges wearing the uniform of a Danish army colonel, but his bearing and the slight accent in his voice when he speaks reveal origins east of the Elbe River. Colonel Heinrich Zimmer, officially dead in Berlin's rubble, now serving as a senior military advisor to the Danish provisional government. Captain Kronborg, Zimmer says in English, accented with the crisp consonants of Prussian military academies. Your father was an honorable soldier, but honor is a luxury that defeated nations cannot afford. We who survived the Reich's collapse understand that ideology is less important than competence. The casual revelation strikes like a physical blow, not just individual war criminals seeking refuge, but an organized infiltration of Denmark's military and political structure by men who learned their trade in the Wehrmacht and SS. The Valkyrie network isn't just helping Nazis escape justice, it's transforming them into the administrators of Denmark's future. Horatio steps forward, his intelligence training evident in the way he catalogs details that might prove useful if any of them survive the night. How many others? He asks quietly. How many dead Germans are now living as Danish citizens? Zimmer's smile is genuinely amused, the expression of a professional soldier appreciating a colleague's tactical thinking. Enough to ensure that Denmark's reconstruction proceeds with Germanic efficiency rather than Scandinavian sentiment. Your provisional government needed experienced administrators, and we needed new identities. A mutually beneficial arrangement. Through the fog that swirls around the brewery's abandoned grounds, the sound of additional vehicles approaches more military trucks, carrying reinforcements for an operation that has already grown beyond the capture of 3 fugitives. Hamlet realizes that they are witnessing the systematic militarization of Denmark by men who never surrendered, who simply changed uniforms and continued the war by other means. Ophelia clutches her satchel of evidence tighter, Understanding that the documents it contains represent more than historical testimony, they are the only proof that Denmark's liberation was incomplete, that the Nazi occupation transformed itself into something more subtle but equally destructive. The evidence we've gathered, she says, her voice carrying across the loading yard with surprising strength. Every photograph, every document, every witness statement, it's already been copied and distributed. Allied intelligence networks that exist outside your influence. If anything happens to us, the whole conspiracy becomes public knowledge. The bluff is delivered with perfect conviction, but Hamlet sees the slight tightening around Claudius's eyes that suggests he recognizes the desperation behind her words. There are no other intelligence networks, no backup plans, no cavalry coming to rescue Danish democracy from those who would sell it to the highest bidder. My dear girl, Claudius replies with paternal condescension. The Allied authorities are far too busy managing the occupation of Germany and containing Soviet expansion to concern themselves with Danish internal affairs. Denmark is stable, cooperative, and grateful for liberation. Why would they investigate a government that serves their strategic interests so effectively? The logic is unassailable and terrifying. Denmark's collaboration with former Nazi officials serves Allied interests by providing stability and technical expertise, making exposure of the conspiracy a threat to Western strategic planning rather than a service to justice. A radio crackles in one of the military vehicles, and a voice reports in code that the perimeter is secure and civilian evacuations are complete. The brewery has been transformed into a kill zone, where witnesses to Danish collaboration will disappear as efficiently as resistance fighters once vanished into Nazi detention centers. Hamlet looks at his companions, Horatio, whose loyalty has never wavered through 5 years of war and months of dangerous investigation, Ophelia, whose courage sustained the resistance network and now threatens to expose the corruption that followed liberation. These are people worth dying for, causes worth the sacrifice of a comfortable life built on convenient lies. You killed my father, he says to Claudius. The simple statement carrying the weight of absolute certainty. You murdered the man who gave you life, who trusted you with family secrets, who believed blood was thicker than ideology. For the first time, Claudius's diplomatic mask slips completely, revealing the cold calculation beneath. Your father was going to destroy everything I built, everything Denmark needed to survive in a world where the strong devour the weak. His death was necessary for the greater good of our nation. The confession hangs in the November air like cordite smoke, witnessed by fog and searchlights, and the ghosts of better men who died, believing their sacrifice would create a Denmark worthy of their blood. The confession shatters the last pretense of civilized discourse, transforming the brewery loading yard into a battlefield where Denmark's future will be decided by violence rather than votes. Claudius steps backward toward his sedan, his hand moving toward the pistol concealed beneath his wool overcoat, while Colonel Zimmer barks orders in German to the surrounding Danish soldiers, who suddenly realize they are taking commands from a man who spent 5 years as their enemy. The moment of confusion among the troops creates the opening that Horatio's military training instantly recognizes. He throws himself sideways, tackling Ophelia behind a concrete loading barrier as automatic weapons fire erupts from multiple positions. The harsh crack of rifle shots echoes off the brewery's brick walls, creating a deadly symphony that transforms the abandoned industrial site into a war zone. Hamlet rolls behind an overturned rail car, the steel sides ringing like bells as bullets strike metal corroded by years of neglect. Around him, the searchlights create a hellscape of stark shadows and blinding illumination, while muzzle flashes strobe through the November fog like deadly fireworks celebrating Denmark's descent into civil warfare. From his position behind the railcar, Hamlet can see Danish soldiers firing at each other, some following Zimmer's orders to eliminate the witnesses, others confused by commands issued in the language of their former oppressors. The Valkyrie network's infiltration of Denmark's military structure becomes visible in the chaos, as officers loyal to the conspiracy reveal themselves by shooting their own countrymen. "Secure the documents!" Zimmer shouts in accented Danish, his Prussian training taking command of the situation with mechanical efficiency. The evidence cannot leave this facility. 2 soldiers advance on Ophelia's position, their rifles trained on the concrete barrier that provides her only protection. The satchel containing proof of the conspiracy lies beside her, its leather surface slick with condensation from the fog that swirls through the gunfire like the ghosts of Denmark's murdered patriots. Hamlet breaks from cover, sprinting across the open ground with the desperate speed of a man who understands that heroism and stupidity often look identical until history renders its verdict. The soldiers turn toward this new threat, their attention divided between multiple targets, in the confusion of combat that reduces complex moral questions to simple mathematics of survival. The impact as Hamlet tackles the first soldier sends both men tumbling into the gravel, their struggle witnessed by searchlights that transform personal combat into theatrical spectacle. Training from his service with Allied forces in Germany takes over muscle memory developed in the ruins of Berlin and the forests of Bavaria, where killing became as routine as breathing, and conscience became a luxury for those who lived long enough to afford philosophical reflection. The soldier's rifle spins away across the wet gravel as they grapple, but his combat knife emerges from its sheath with practiced efficiency. The blade reflects searchlight illumination as it arcs toward Hamlet's throat, only to be deflected by a forearm that bears scars from previous encounters with men who chose violence over conversation. Behind them, the second soldier aims his weapon at the struggling figures, but Horatio's pistol, liberated from a dead German officer in Hamburg, speaks first. The shot echoes through the brewery grounds with the finality of justice delivered by those who survived long enough to understand the difference between necessary killing and murder for convenience. Claudius has reached his sedan, but instead of fleeing, he withdraws a submachine gun from the vehicle's trunk, a German Schmeisser that speaks of connections to weapons caches hidden throughout Denmark by retreating Wehrmacht units. His expensive overcoat billows in the wind, created by ricocheting bullets as he fires controlled bursts at his nephew, the same calculated precision he once applied to eliminating resistance leaders who threatened his wartime business arrangements. "You cannot stop what has already begun," Claudius shouts over the gunfire, his diplomatic mask finally discarded in favor of the raw ambition that drove him to fratricide. "Denmark belongs to those strong enough to seize it." The bullets spark off the railcar's steel sides, creating showers of sparks that illuminate Hamlet's face with hellish light. He understands now that this confrontation extends beyond personal revenge. The Denmark his father died defending has already been conquered by an enemy more subtle than the Wehrmacht, but equally destructive to everything decent men fought to preserve. Ophelia rises from behind her barrier, clutching the evidence satchel against her chest like armor made of truth rather than steel. Her face shows the grim determination of someone who survived 5 years of Nazi occupation only to discover that liberation brought different masters wearing familiar faces. "The documents are copies," she screams into the chaos, her voice cutting through gunfire with desperate courage. "Hidden in locations throughout Copenhagen. Kill us, and you only prove everything we've documented." The bluff carries conviction born of desperation, but Hamlet sees Zimmer's cold smile in the searchlight glare. The former SS colonel understands propaganda warfare better than anyone. Dead witnesses cannot contradict official explanations, and missing documents can always be dismissed as forgeries created by communist agitators or traumatized veterans whose minds broke under the pressure of conspiracy theories. A new sound cuts through the gunfire, the deep rumble of heavy trucks approaching through the industrial district. For a moment, hope flickers in Hamlet's chest as he imagines Allied reinforcements arriving to restore order and justice. But the vehicles that emerge from the fog carry Danish military markings, and their occupants move with the coordinated efficiency of men following predetermined plans rather than responding to emergency calls. "Reinforcements," Zimmer announces with satisfaction, his accent thickening as excitement overrides his careful Danish pronunciation. The entire operation will be explained as a tragic misunderstanding: communist infiltrators impersonating government officials, forcing loyal soldiers to defend themselves against domestic terrorists. The narrative is already written, the official report drafted before the first shot was fired. Denmark's newspapers will report the heroic action of security forces against Soviet agents attempting to destabilize the provisional government, and 3 bodies will disappear into graves marked with false names and fabricated crimes. But the approaching trucks bring an unexpected complication as their headlights sweep across the brewery grounds. They illuminate something that makes both Claudius and Zimmer freeze with sudden recognition. Standing among the Danish soldiers are men in civilian clothes, whose faces trigger memories of resistance networks and underground operations that were supposed to be completely eliminated. Bernardo, Horatio whispers, recognizing the old night watchman who witnessed Major Kronborg's murder. But Bernardo is not alone. Beside him stand other survivors of the resistance, men and women who spent 5 years learning to move through shadows and strike at enemies who thought themselves untouchable. The reinforcements Claudius expected have become the instruments of his exposure. Word of the brewery confrontation spread through channels that the Valkyrie network never discovered, reaching patriots who understood that Denmark's liberation remained incomplete as long as Nazi collaborators wore Danish uniforms and drew Danish salaries. The resistance never ended, Ophelia realizes, her voice carrying wonder and terrible hope in equal measure. We just changed targets. The fog swirls through the brewery grounds, carrying with it the sound of footsteps that move with purpose rather than confusion. In the distance, Copenhagen's church bells begin to toll midnight, marking the end of one day and the beginning of another in Denmark's long struggle for its soul. The resistance fighters emerge from the fog like specters of Denmark's suppressed conscience, their faces bearing the weathered marks of men and women who learned that peace is not the absence of war but the continuation of struggle by other means. They move with the silent efficiency that kept them alive through 5 years of Nazi occupation, surrounding the brewery grounds in a tactical formation that transforms hunters into the hunted. Bernardo leads them with the quiet authority of someone who has spent months gathering evidence and witnesses, building a case against the conspiracy that murdered his commanding officer. Behind him walk shadows from Denmark's underground resistance couriers who carried messages through Nazi checkpoints, saboteurs who destroyed German supply lines, intelligence operatives who documented collaboration and waited for the right moment to demand justice. The Danish soldiers loyal to Claudius find themselves caught between loyalties orders from superiors whose legitimacy now appears questionable, and the presence of patriots whose sacrifice earned them the right to question anyone's commitment to Danish freedom. Some lower their weapons in confusion, recognizing faces of men who saved their lives during the dark years. Colonel Zimmer, Bernardo calls across the loading yard, his voice carrying the flat authority of a man reading charges against the accused. Heinrich Zimmer, formerly Oberfuhrer of the 12th SS Panzer Division, wanted for war crimes committed in occupied Poland and France. By order of the Danish War Crimes Tribunal, you are under arrest. The formal pronouncement shatters the last pretense that this confrontation concerns only family matters and personal grief. Zimmer's presence in Danish military uniform becomes not just evidence of infiltration but proof that the Valkyrie network represents a continuation of Nazi policy through administrative rather than military means. Zimmer's response is swift and predictable. The submachine gun in his hands speaks with Germanic precision, cutting down 2 resistance fighters before their weapons clear leather holsters. But the survivors respond with the ingrained reflexes of people who spent years fighting better-armed opponents, using darkness and cover to transform the brewery grounds into a maze where numbers matter less than knowledge of terrain. Hamlet uses the chaos to advance on his uncle's position, moving through shadows that shift and dance in the searchlight glare. Claudius sees him coming, the Schmeisser swinging around to track his nephew's approach. But years of comfortable conspiracy work have dulled reflexes once sharpened by the desperate improvisation of wartime survival. The two men face each other across 10 yards of gravel and 5 years of accumulated lies, uncle and nephew separated by a moral chasm that no amount of blood relationship can bridge. In the harsh illumination of military searchlights, their confrontation becomes a tableau that represents Denmark's struggle with its own complicity in evil. You destroyed everything father built, Hamlet says, his voice cutting through the gunfire with the calm finality of judgment rendered after careful deliberation. You sold Denmark's freedom to the same bastards who murdered our people. Claudius maintains his weapon's aim with hands that no longer shake, the tremor of guilt replaced by the steady grip of someone who has accepted damnation in exchange for power. Your father built an illusion, he replies, his voice carrying over the sound of combat with diplomatic precision. I built a future. Denmark will survive and prosper while other nations tear themselves apart with ideological purity. The justification rings hollow amid the violence that surrounds them. Danish citizens shooting each other while former Nazi officers command troops whose uniforms bear the symbols of a nation they helped destroy. Whatever future Claudius imagined, it looks remarkably similar to the occupation they supposedly ended. A explosion rocks the brewery's far wall as someone resistance fighter or conspiracy loyalist employs demolition skills learned during the war years. The blast illuminates the entire facility in orange flame, revealing the scope of the battle that has transformed an abandoned industrial site into a microcosm of Denmark's unfinished liberation. Through the smoke and flame, Ophelia appears beside Hamlet, with the evidence satchel clutched against her chest and determination written across her face in lines that speak of decisions made under fire. "The documents," she shouts over the chaos. "We need to get them to Allied authorities who can't be corrupted or eliminated." But even as she speaks, both she and Hamlet understand the probability that such authorities no longer exist, that the Valkyrie network's months of systematic infiltration have compromised every level of Danish and Allied administration that might have acted on evidence of collaboration and murder. There's another way, Hamlet realizes, his voice carrying sudden clarity born of desperate inspiration. The resistance network never fully disbanded. If we can't find honest authorities, we create them. The concept strikes Ophelia with the force of recognition, not official justice delivered through courts and tribunals, but popular justice administered by those who earned the right through blood and sacrifice. Denmark's true liberation will come not from foreign allies or domestic politicians, but from Danish patriots who refuse to accept that survival requires moral compromise. Claudius seems to read their thoughts in the momentary silence that falls between bursts of gunfire. His finger tightens on the Schmeisser's trigger, but the weapon clicks empty at the moment when execution would have solved his problems with mechanical efficiency. The expensive submachine gun becomes useless weight in his hands, while his nephew advances with the steady pace of inevitability. "The war never ended for you, did it?" Hamlet says, understanding flooding his voice with something approaching pity. "You just changed sides without changing methods." The observation strikes deeper than bullets, revealing the psychological truth that explains 5 years of collaboration and months of conspiracy. Claudius never joined the resistance against Nazi occupation. He simply transferred his survival skills from serving one master to serving another, always choosing accommodation over confrontation, until accommodation became indistinguishable from collaboration. Colonel Zimmer's voice cuts through their confrontation with Prussian authority. "Withdrawal. All units fall back to secondary positions." The order confirms what Hamlet suspected: the conspiracy extends beyond this brewery, beyond Copenhagen, beyond Denmark itself. Tonight's exposure represents a tactical defeat rather than strategic destruction. But some defeats carry consequences that extend beyond military calculations. As Zimmer retreats toward vehicles that will carry him back into the shadows of post-war Europe, Bernardo's rifle speaks with the voice of justice delayed but not denied. The former SS colonel falls beside a loading dock that once shipped Danish goods to feed German war production, his blood mixing with gravel that remembers other violence from darker years. Claudius drops the empty submachine gun and raises his hands in surrender, but his eyes hold the calculation of someone still planning escapes and reversals. "Nephew," he says with the smooth desperation of a diplomat buying time through negotiation, "we can reach an accommodation. The network is larger than you imagine. Destroy me, and you destroy Denmark's only defense against Soviet infiltration." The final card played with professional skill, patriotism invoked to justify treason, national security used to excuse collaboration with war criminals. But Hamlet has heard too many justifications tonight, seen too much evidence of what accommodation with evil produces when decent men choose comfort over conscience. "My father trusted you," he says simply, the words carrying more condemnation than any elaborate accusation. "He died, believing blood meant something." The gunfire around them begins to fade as resistance fighters secure the brewery grounds and conspiracy loyalists flee into the fog that conceals Copenhagen's industrial district. In the sudden quiet, the sound of approaching sirens suggests that official authority, whatever its loyalty or corruption, will soon arrive to impose order on chaos and explanations on truth. Hamlet looks at the evidence satchel in Ophelia's hands, understanding that its contents represent both vindication and responsibility. Exposing the Valkyrie network will tear Denmark apart, but allowing it to continue means accepting that liberation was just another form of occupation administered by more sophisticated masters. "We publish everything," he decides, the words carrying the weight of a man choosing difficult truth over comfortable lies. "Every photograph, every document, every witness statement." Let Denmark decide if it wants to remain free or just comfortable. 3 weeks after the brewery confrontation, Copenhagen awakens to a Denmark transformed by revelations that have torn through the comfortable mythology of liberation like artillery shells through paper walls. The front pages of every major newspaper carry photographs that Danish citizens never expected to see: their provisional government officials shaking hands with men whose faces had appeared on Allied wanted posters, financial documents showing Swiss bank accounts fattened with gold, looted from occupied territories, and testimony from witnesses who spent months in hiding rather than face the machinery of organized silence. The Danish parliament building stands under military guard, not to protect democracy but to contain the chaos that truth has unleashed upon a nation unprepared for the scope of its own complicity. Inside the chambers where legislators once debated agricultural subsidies and fishing quotas, emergency sessions now grapple with the fundamental question of whether Denmark can survive knowing what it helped to hide. Hamlet stands at the window of a Copenhagen hotel room that serves as temporary headquarters for what newspapers have begun calling the Truth Commission, an informal tribunal of resistance veterans, war crimes, investigators, and journalists committed to documenting every detail of the Valkyrie network's operations. The view encompasses a city where Danish flags fly at half-staff, not in mourning for the dead but in acknowledgement of ideals that died without proper burial. Below on the street, crowds gather around newspaper stands with the desperate hunger of people discovering that their recent history was written by liars and murderers. Some faces show the hollow shock of citizens learning that their liberation was incomplete, while others display the angry determination of those who refuse to accept that survival required moral compromise with their former tormentors. The Allied command is demanding explanations, Horatio reports, entering the room with a folder thick with diplomatic cables and military communiques. His face shows the strain of 3 weeks spent coordinating with intelligence networks that exist outside official channels, building a case that no government can ignore, despite every incentive to do so. The diplomatic language in his folder cannot disguise the rage of Allied commanders who discovered that Danish officials they trusted were facilitating the escape of war criminals whose capture had cost British and American lives. General Montgomery himself has demanded a complete investigation, while American intelligence services have begun reviewing every Danish collaboration during the war years. The provisional government is collapsing, Ophelia adds, spreading newspapers across the hotel room's small table like tarot cards, revealing Denmark's uncertain future. Her role as the Commission's chief archivist has aged her beyond her 24 years, the weight of documenting national betrayal visible in the premature lines around her eyes. The headlines tell the story of a democracy consuming itself in pursuit of truth, government ministers resigning in disgrace, Allied investigations expanding beyond Denmark to examine collaboration networks throughout liberated Europe, and Danish citizens demanding accountability from institutions they can no longer trust. Laertes Poulsen has been calling for your arrest. She continues, her voice carefully neutral when speaking of her own brother. He claims the Commission represents a communist conspiracy to destabilize Western democracy. The accusation stings because it contains enough truth to be dangerous, exposing the Valkyrie network has indeed destabilized Danish democracy, and some Commission members do represent leftist political organizations that see collaboration with former Nazis as evidence of capitalist moral bankruptcy. The fact that Laertes survived Theresienstadt while his sister fought in the resistance has created a family schism that mirrors Denmark's larger divisions. Through the hotel window, Hamlet watches a demonstration forming in the Parliament Square, Danish veterans, carrying banners, demanding justice for their fallen comrades. Their ranks swelled by families who lost loved ones to Nazi reprisals, and are only now learning that some of their killers lived comfortably in post-war Denmark under new identities. Public support is strong, he observes, noting the size of the crowd and the presence of Danish flags mixed with resistance symbols. But public support means nothing if we can't find judges willing to hear cases or prosecutors willing to file charges. The observation touches the heart of their dilemma. Exposing corruption is easier than prosecuting it when the corruption extends through every level of the justice system. Danish courts that should try war criminals are staffed by judges who approved their citizenship papers, while prosecutors who should seek convictions receive their appointments from officials now under investigation. A knock at the door interrupts their planning session. Colonel Marcellus enters wearing civilian clothes that emphasize his transformation from military officer to private citizen, his resignation from the Danish army, a protest against commanders whose loyalties remain questionable. Behind him walks a woman Hamlet recognizes from newspaper photographs, Rebecca Rosencrantz, newly appointed head of the Allied War Crimes Investigation Unit. Captain Kronborg, Rosencrantz says, her accent carrying the authority of someone who spent 3 years documenting Nazi atrocities across occupied Europe. The evidence your commission has gathered represents the most comprehensive exposure of collaboration networks we've seen in any liberated territory. Her praise carries weight beyond diplomatic courtesy. Rosencrantz's reputation for thorough investigation and successful prosecution makes her endorsement crucial for legitimizing the Commission's work in the eyes of Allied authorities. However, she continues, settling into a chair that faces the window overlooking the demonstration, we face significant political obstacles. Several Allied intelligence services employed former German officers whose expertise was considered valuable for understanding Soviet capabilities and intentions. The revelation strikes like a physical blow. The Valkyrie network represents not just Danish collaboration but a broader Allied strategy of incorporating former Nazi officials into post-war intelligence operations. Exposing Claudius's conspiracy threatens to reveal similar arrangements throughout Western Europe. Operation Paperclip in America, Operation Epsilon in Britain, Marcellus explains grimly. Every Allied nation has been recruiting German scientists, intelligence officers, and technical experts. Your uncle's network was just the Danish version of programs that extend throughout NATO territories. The scope of the problem becomes clear. They are not fighting an isolated Danish conspiracy, but challenging a systematic Allied policy of prioritizing technical expertise over moral accountability. The same logic that justified employing former Nazis to fight Soviet communism also justified allowing war criminals to escape justice in exchange for cooperation. The demonstrations are growing larger, Ophelia observes, watching as the crowd in Parliament Square swells with new arrivals carrying homemade banners and resistance flags. Danish citizens are demanding trials and executions. Public pressure may force action, even if political pressure opposes it. Through the hotel's thin walls comes the sound of chanting voices, demanding justice in Danish, their words carrying the accumulated anger of people who discovered that their liberation came with hidden costs and secret compromises. The crowd represents Denmark's conscience made manifest, refusing to accept that pragmatic considerations should outweigh moral imperatives. There's another complication, Rosencrantz adds, her voice heavy with the weight of unwelcome news. Several commission witnesses have disappeared over the past week. Bernardo Olsen was found dead in Copenhagen harbor yesterday morning. Official cause of death is suicide, but the autopsy revealed injuries consistent with professional interrogation techniques. The news hits the room like a grenade explosion, confirming suspicions that the Valkyrie network's destruction was incomplete. Somewhere in Denmark's shadows, former Nazi officials and their Danish collaborators continue to operate with the efficiency of men who learned that survival depends on eliminating threats before they can testify. Hamlet turns from the window to face his companions, understanding that their fight has entered a new phase where exposure must be followed by protection, where truth must be defended with the same violence once used to suppress it. We need to accelerate the investigation, he decides. Publish everything immediately, before more witnesses disappear or more evidence gets destroyed. The Copenhagen morgue occupies the basement of Rigshospitalet, its sterile corridors echoing with the footsteps of men who have seen too much death to be shocked by evidence of murder disguised as suicide. Dr. Erik Voltemand, the chief medical examiner, leads Hamlet and Rosencrantz through hallways lined with metal drawers containing bodies that tell Denmark's unwritten history. Resistance fighters pulled from the harbor, collaborators found dead in apparent accidents, and civilians whose only crime was witnessing events that powerful men prefer to forget. Bernardo Olsen, Voltemand says, sliding open drawer number 47 to reveal the body of the old night watchman whose testimony could have confirmed Major Kronborg's murder. Official cause of death: drowning consistent with suicide by jumping from Knippelsbro Bridge. Unofficial cause: systematic torture followed by execution. The body tells a different story than the police report. Rope burns on the wrists speak of extended restraint. Cigarette burns on the torso suggest interrogation techniques perfected in Gestapo basements. and the single bullet wound behind the left ear demonstrates the efficiency of men who learned their trade in SS training facilities. Professional work, Rosencrantz observes. Her experienced eye cataloging details that Danish authorities chose to overlook. The same signature we've seen in war crimes investigations across occupied Europe. Whoever killed him wanted information before they wanted silence. Hamlet studies the old man's face, noting the peaceful expression that death has granted to features that knew too much fear during their final hours. Bernardo died protecting secrets he had already revealed, tortured for information he had already provided, murdered to prevent testimony he had already given. They're not just eliminating witnesses, he realizes aloud. They're sending a message to anyone else who might consider coming forward. The morgue's harsh fluorescent lighting casts everything in the clinical white of hospital corridors, but cannot bleach away the stains of violence that permeate every surface. Around them, the tools of forensic medicine's scales, measuring devices, examination tables, serve dual purpose as instruments of truth and monuments to Denmark's difficulty accepting what that truth reveals. Doctor. Voltaman closes the drawer with the gentle precision of someone who has spent 30 years treating the dead with more respect than the living often receive. There have been 7 other deaths in the past 2 weeks. He continues, consulting a clipboard that serves as an unofficial record of Denmark's secret war. All witnesses connected to your commission's investigation. All officially classified as accidents or suicides. The systematic elimination of testimony represents more than damage control. It demonstrates resources and coordination that extend far beyond the capabilities of fugitive war criminals. Somewhere in Denmark's administrative structure, the Valkyrie network continues to operate with access to police files, witness lists, and the kind of operational support that only government backing can provide. Colonel Fortinbras wants to meet with you, Rosencrantz says as they exit the morgue into Copenhagen's gray afternoon. Norwegian intelligence has been tracking similar networks throughout Scandinavia. They believe the conspiracy extends across multiple national boundaries. The revelation transforms their investigation from a Danish internal matter into an international operation that challenges the foundation of post-war European reconstruction. If collaboration networks exist throughout liberated territories, then the entire Allied victory becomes questionable, not military defeat of Nazi Germany, but administrative absorption of Nazi methods into democratic governments. Their conversation is interrupted by the arrival of a military courier carrying urgent dispatches from the Truth Commission's hotel headquarters. The young soldier's face shows the strain of someone delivering news that no one wants to hear but everyone needs to know. Captain Kronborg, he reports with military precision. Miss Poulsen requests your immediate return. There's been a development regarding your mother. The words strike like artillery fire, confirming Hamlet's worst fears about the personal cost of challenging men who learned that family connections provide no protection against political necessity. His mother Gertrude, whose remarriage to Claudius seemed like grief-driven poor judgment, now appears as something far more sinister. The ride through Copenhagen streets reveals a city in transition between denial and acceptance, its citizens still learning to live with knowledge that their liberation was incomplete. Danish flags hang at half-mast from government buildings, while resistance symbols appear as graffiti on walls that once displayed Nazi proclamations. The visual juxtaposition speaks to a nation caught between honoring its heroes and acknowledging its compromises. At the hotel headquarters, Ophelia meets them with documents that tell a story more complex and disturbing than simple collaboration. Her face shows the strain of 3 sleepless days spent analyzing financial records, personnel files, and correspondence that reveals the true scope of the Valkyrie network's infiltration into Danish society. Your mother wasn't just married to Claudius, she begins, spreading bank statements and property deeds across the table with the systematic precision of someone building an unshakable case. She was his partner in managing the network's financial operations. Swiss accounts, property transfers, currency exchanges. She handled the money while he handled the politics. The evidence is overwhelming and heartbreaking. Gertrude's signature on documents authorizing payments to war criminals, her name on bank accounts fattened with gold, looted from Jewish businesses, her involvement in real estate transactions that provided safe houses for SS officers supposedly dead in Berlin's rubble. She knew, Hamlet whispers, the realization cutting deeper than physical wounds. From the beginning, she knew what Claudius was doing, and she chose to participate rather than resist. Through the hotel window, the demonstration in Parliament Square continues to grow, fed by revelations that transform every comfortable assumption about Danish heroism during the occupation years. The crowd includes faces. Hamlet recognizes resistance fighters who risked everything for Danish freedom, families who lost loved ones to Nazi reprisals, citizens who believed that liberation meant the end of moral compromise. There's more. Ophelia continues, her voice heavy with reluctance to deliver additional devastating news. Intelligence intercepts suggest that your mother is planning to leave Denmark. Swiss bank withdrawals, travel documents, bookings on ships departing for South America. The pattern is familiar from war crimes, investigations throughout Europe, guilty parties fleeing to Argentina and Chile, where former Nazi officials have established new lives with new identities. Gertrude's escape would represent more than personal betrayal. It would confirm that the conspiracy extends beyond individual corruption to systematic preparation for abandoning Denmark when exposure becomes inevitable. She's at the castle, Hamlet says, understanding flooding his voice with terrible certainty. Elsinore. She's gone home to collect whatever evidence she couldn't destroy from a distance. The observation strikes everyone in the room with the force of tactical revelation. If Gertrude is cleaning house at the castle, she has access to documents and communications that could expose the network's complete structure or destroy evidence that would convict dozens of war criminals currently living comfortably throughout Western Europe. We need to move now. Rosencrantz decides, her investigative instincts overriding diplomatic caution. If she destroys those records, we lose our best chance of understanding how deep this conspiracy really goes. Outside, Copenhagen's church bells begin to toll the evening hour, their bronze voices carrying across a city where truth and lies wage daily battles in newspaper columns and parliamentary debates. The sound speaks to Denmark's long history of survival through occupation and liberation, but also to the possibility that some victories are too costly to celebrate. Hamlet gathers the evidence files with hands that no longer shake, understanding that his personal war has become something larger than family revenge or national shame. The Valkyrie network represents a fundamental challenge to the idea that evil can be defeated through military victory, that democracy can survive when it accommodates those who would destroy it from within. My mother made her choice, he says quietly. The words carrying the weight of a son's love transformed into a citizen's duty. Now I have to make mine. The December wind cuts across the sound like a blade forged from Arctic ice, driving snow against the ancient walls of Elsinore Castle with the relentless fury of a nation demanding answers from those who betrayed its trust. The medieval fortress stands silhouetted against the gray Danish sky, its towers and battlements transformed from symbols of national strength into monuments to institutional corruption that reaches back through 5 years of occupation and forward into an uncertain future. Hamlet approaches the castle gates in a commandeered military jeep, its engine struggling against the brutal cold that has descended upon Denmark like divine judgment. Beside him, Horatio checks the ammunition in his service pistol with the methodical care of someone who learned that survival depends on preparation rather than hope. Behind them, Rosencrantz studies intelligence reports that paint an increasingly desperate picture of a conspiracy in its death throes. The castle courtyard, once filled with the purposeful activity of provisional government business, now stands nearly empty, except for a handful of guards whose loyalty appears questionable, and a black sedan whose engine runs continuously in preparation for immediate departure. Smoke rises from several chimneys, suggesting fires that burn more than coal. The acrid scent carries the distinctive smell of burning paper and photographic chemicals. She's destroying evidence, Horatio observes, noting the volume of smoke emerging from what was once Major Kronborg's private office. Systematic destruction of financial records, correspondence, anything that could connect the network to specific operations. The observation strikes Hamlet with the bitter irony of a son arriving too late to prevent his mother from erasing the last traces of his father's murder. Somewhere in those flames burn the documents that could have provided complete justice, the evidence that could have exposed every participant in Denmark's systematic betrayal of its own liberation. They enter the castle through the main hall, their footsteps echoing in chambers that remember better times and better men. The portraits of Danish kings and military heroes look down upon corridors where former Nazi officials walked as honored guests, where resistance fighters were discussed as security threats, and where a woman chose comfortable complicity over dangerous truth. The guards at the stairway to the administrative floors recognize Hamlet but make no move to stop him, perhaps from residual respect for his father's memory, perhaps from uncertainty about which authority they should serve in Denmark's current chaos. Their faces show the confusion of soldiers whose orders come from superiors whose legitimacy grows more questionable with each day's revelations. Gertrude's office occupies what was once the Queen's chambers, its ornate furnishings incongruous with the modern filing cabinets and communications equipment that serve the business of post-war reconstruction. Through the tall windows, the view encompasses the Sound where Danish and German ships once waited for safe passage, where resistance boats carried weapons and refugees, and where bodies of the murdered and executed were sometimes discovered by fishermen who learned not to ask too many questions. She stands with her back to the door, feeding documents into a fireplace that burns with unnatural intensity. Her movements possess the methodical efficiency of someone destroying a lifetime's worth of secrets, each paper consumed by flames that transform evidence into ash and complicity into silence. Her expensive coat hangs over a chair packed with valuables, jewelry, cash, and travel documents that suggest immediate departure from a Denmark that no longer offers sanctuary to those who served its enemies. "Mother," Hamlet says quietly, the single word carrying the weight of 28 years of love transformed into something darker and more complex. Gertrude turns slowly, her face showing the strain of weeks spent watching her carefully constructed life collapse under the weight of exposure. At 43, she retains the beauty that attracted two powerful men, but her eyes hold the hollow exhaustion of someone who discovered that survival requires sacrifices that consume the soul. "My son," she replies, her voice carrying genuine sorrow mixed with the calculation of someone still seeking escape from consequences too large to evade. "I hoped you would understand eventually. Your father was a good man, but good men don't survive in a world where practical considerations outweigh moral idealism." The justification flows like water over stone smooth, practiced, refined through months of repetition in private moments when conscience battled convenience. Around them, the fireplace continues consuming documents, while winter wind howls through castle walls that have witnessed 5 centuries of Danish compromise with foreign powers. "You helped them kill him," Hamlet states, with the clinical precision of someone presenting evidence to a tribunal. "Your own husband, the father of your child, the man who trusted you with his life and his secrets." Gertrude returns to feeding papers into the flames, each document curling and blackening as it releases secrets into smoke that will never testify in any courtroom. "Your father would have destroyed everything we built," she says without turning around. Denmark needed stability, not the chaos that comes from trying to punish every compromise made during impossible years. The logic is seductive and horrifying: murder justified as political necessity, betrayal rebranded as pragmatic governance. Behind her words lies the voice of every collaborator throughout history who chose survival over resistance, comfort over conscience, personal advantage over collective good. "The gold in your Swiss accounts came from Jewish families," Hamlet continues relentlessly. "Wedding rings torn from the fingers of women on their way to death camps. Fillings pulled from the teeth of children who died believing someone would remember their names." For the first time, Gertrude pauses in her destruction of evidence, her shoulders sagging under the weight of accusations that penetrate every rationalization she has constructed over months of moral compromise. The firelight illuminates her profile, revealing features that once radiated the confidence of a woman married to power, but now show the haunted exhaustion of someone who discovered that power demands prices too terrible to calculate. "You don't understand what it was like," she whispers, her voice carrying the desperate tone of someone seeking absolution from crimes that admit no forgiveness. 5 years of occupation. 5 years of watching good people disappear for asking the wrong questions or helping the wrong families. Survival required accommodations. Through the office windows, the lights of Copenhagen are visible across the Sound, a city struggling to rebuild itself on foundations that include both heroic sacrifice and shameful collaboration. Those lights represent millions of Danish citizens who made daily choices between resistance and accommodation, most of whom chose something between heroism and treason. "But you didn't just accommodate," Hamlet presses, pulling photographs from his coat pocket, images of his mother at social gatherings with SS officers, shaking hands with men whose uniforms bore the symbols of Denmark's oppression. You participated. You profited. You helped them organize the escape routes that allowed murderers to live comfortably while their victims rotted in mass graves. The photographs scatter across her desk like accusations made visible, each image a frozen moment of betrayal that no amount of flames can erase from history. Gertrude stares at them with the expression of someone seeing herself clearly for the first time in years. Claudius offered protection, she says finally, her voice barely audible above the wind that shakes the castle's ancient windows. Not just for me, but for you. Your military service, your survival through the war, it was all arranged. Protected. You lived because I made accommodations with people who could ensure you came home alive. The revelation strikes like a physical blow, transforming Hamlet's understanding of his own survival from military luck to maternal sacrifice tainted by moral compromise. His safe return from the war, the foundation of his ability to seek justice for his father, was purchased with the blood money of collaboration. So my father died to protect arrangements that kept me alive, he realizes aloud, the irony cutting deeper than any blade forged from Danish steel. Around them, the office fills with the smoke of burning secrets while Copenhagen's lights twinkle across water that has carried too many bodies and concealed too many sins. Somewhere in those flames burn the names of war criminals who will now escape justice, the bank account numbers that could have funded reparations to survivors, and the correspondence that could have exposed collaboration networks throughout occupied Europe. The ship leaves from Malmö in 3 hours, Gertrude says, turning back to the fireplace where the last documents await destruction. New identities, new lives in Argentina where the past doesn't matter, and the future offers possibilities that Denmark can no longer provide. The escape route is well established, tested by hundreds of former Nazi officials who discovered that South America offers sanctuary for those whose expertise outweighs their war crimes. But for Hamlet, his mother's planned flight represents more than personal abandonment. It symbolizes Denmark's willingness to export its moral problems rather than confront them. I can't let you destroy the rest, he says, his hand moving toward the service pistol that has become as familiar as his own heartbeat. Too many people died for that evidence. Too many families deserve answers about what happened to their loved ones. The confrontation has reached its inevitable conclusion, a son forced to choose between family loyalty and national justice, between personal love and collective responsibility. Outside, the December wind carries the sound of church bells tolling across Copenhagen, marking another day in Denmark's difficult journey toward acknowledging the full cost of its survival. The confrontation in Gertrude's office stretches like a held breath, mother and son separated by 5 years of war and a lifetime of lies, while the fireplace consumes Denmark's hidden history one document at a time. Through the tall windows, snow continues to fall over the sound, each flake carrying with it the silence of a winter that has arrived early and with unusual severity. As if nature itself has grown weary of bearing witness to human betrayal. Hamlet's hand rests on his service pistol, but the weight of the weapon cannot compare to the weight of the choice before him. A son confronting the woman who gave him life, but helped orchestrate his father's death. A Danish officer facing a collaborator who happens to be his mother. The medieval stones of Elsinore Castle have witnessed centuries of such moments when personal loyalty collides with public duty, when love must be weighed against justice. You can still walk away, Gertrude says softly, her voice carrying the desperate hope of a woman who spent months convincing herself that maternal bonds might prove stronger than moral obligations. Take what money you need, disappear into the reconstruction chaos. Denmark will survive without your testimony, and you'll survive without the burden of destroying your own family. The offer hangs in the air like smoke from the burning evidence, seductive in its simplicity and horrifying in its implications. To accept would mean abandoning every Danish citizen who died, believing their sacrifice served a greater purpose than national survival through moral compromise. Behind Hamlet, footsteps echo in the castle corridors, Horatio and Rosencrantz approaching with the steady precision of people who understand that some confrontations cannot be avoided or postponed. Their presence transforms this private family crisis into a moment of public accountability, witnessed by those who represent Denmark's conscience rather than its convenience. The last of the financial records, Gertrude continues, lifting a thick folder from her desk with hands that no longer shake. Account numbers for every Swiss bank that handled network transactions. Names and new identities for over 300 war criminals, successfully relocated throughout South America. Operational details for similar networks operating in Norway, Belgium, and France. The folder represents the crown jewel of the Valkyrie network's documentation evidence that could expose collaboration on a continental scale, bringing justice to thousands of war criminals who thought themselves safely beyond the reach of Allied tribunals. Its destruction would ensure that Denmark's collaboration remains a footnote in history rather than a chapter in a larger story of post-war moral failure. "Mother, please," Hamlet says, his voice breaking with the strain of a man who discovered that love and duty can become mortal enemies. "Father died for what's in that folder. Bernardo died protecting it. How many more people have to die before Denmark admits what it allowed to happen?" Gertrude moves toward the fireplace with the folder clutched against her chest like armor made of paper and shame. "Your father died because he couldn't understand that perfect justice is a luxury that defeated nations cannot afford," she replies, her voice gaining strength as she approaches the flames. "Sometimes survival requires accommodations that idealists call collaboration, but realists call necessity." The justification echoes through the castle's ancient halls, joining the voices of every collaborator throughout history who chose survival over sacrifice, accommodation over resistance. But here in this room, where Danish kings once made decisions that shaped the fate of nations, the weight of historical precedent cannot disguise the personal betrayal of a wife murdering her husband for the crime of maintaining moral standards. Through the windows, the sound of vehicles approaches across the castle's courtyard, multiple engines suggesting either rescue or capture, salvation or doom. The headlights cut through the falling snow like searchlights, seeking truth in the darkness that has settled over Denmark since liberation revealed itself as incomplete victory. "Norwegian intelligence," Horatio announces from the doorway, his relief evident as he recognizes the voices of Colonel Fortinbras and his investigation team. "They've brought Allied military police and a full forensic unit. Whatever evidence survives this night will be preserved for international tribunal." The arrival of foreign investigators represents both vindication and national humiliation. Denmark's inability to police its own collaboration, requiring outside intervention to restore moral order. But it also means that Gertrude's escape to South America has become impossible, her network's protection extended only to Danish territorial waters. "The ships in Malmö harbor are under Allied surveillance," Rosenkrantz adds, entering with documents that speak to coordinated international action. "Every known escape route has been closed. Argentina and Chile have agreed to extradite war criminals rather than risk Allied sanctions. The net that once protected the Valkyrie network now traps its participants, international cooperation, ensuring that there will be no comfortable exile for those who profited from Danish collaboration." Gertrude stares at the folder in her hands, understanding that its contents now represent her only bargaining chip in negotiations with Allied justice. "You can still make the right choice," Hamlet urges, stepping closer to his mother with hands extended in supplication rather than threat. "Testify against the network. Help Allied investigators locate the war criminals who escaped. Give some meaning to Father's death by ensuring it wasn't completely in vain." The castle's great hall fills with the sound of Allied personnel establishing their command center radios, crackling with communications to investigation teams throughout Scandinavia. Typewriters recording testimony from witnesses who no longer fear assassination, and the steady voices of men building legal cases that will restore some measure of justice to a continent that learned to live with moral compromise. "Claudius is dead," Colonel Fortinbras announces, his Norwegian accent carrying news that strikes the room like artillery fire. "Shot while resisting arrest at the Swedish border. His vehicle contained gold bars, forged documents, and a confession implicating over 50 Danish officials in war crimes facilitation." The revelation transforms Gertrude from potential escapee to key witness in a conspiracy that extends far beyond Denmark's borders. Her husband's death eliminates her primary protector, while confirming that the network's collapse has become inevitable, making cooperation with Allied investigators her only path to survival. "He promised me protection," she whispers, the folder sliding from her numb fingers to scatter its contents across the office floor. 5 years of promises that Denmark would emerge stronger from accommodation than resistance. 5 years of believing that survival justified any compromise. The scattered documents tell the story of systematic betrayal correspondence with SS officers, financial arrangements with war criminals, and operational plans for relocating Nazi officials throughout the Western Hemisphere. Each page represents Danish complicity in allowing evil to escape justice and find new victims in countries that offered sanctuary to those who brought European expertise in oppression and murder. Hamlet kneels beside his mother as she collapses into a chair that suddenly seems too large for her diminished frame. The weight of 5 years' worth of moral compromise settles over her like a burial shroud, transforming the confident woman who once moved through castle corridors with administrative authority into something smaller and more human. "I loved your father," she says, her voice barely audible above the wind that rattles the castle's ancient windows. "But I loved you more. Everything I did was to ensure you survived the war and came home safely." A mother's duty to her child outweighed a wife's duty to her husband. The confession carries the ring of truth, but truth complicated by the reality that maternal love became the foundation for national betrayal. Through her office windows, Copenhagen's lights shine across water that carried resistance boats and refugee vessels, merchant ships and U-boats, the living and the dead of Denmark's long struggle for survival. Outside, Allied investigators begin the systematic work of documenting Denmark's collaboration with scientific precision, photographing evidence and recording testimony that will ensure this chapter of history cannot be forgotten or denied. The process represents both national humiliation and necessary healing, Denmark finally confronting the full cost of its liberation. The Allied investigation team transforms Elsinore Castle's Great Hall into a war crimes tribunal, their documentation equipment creating a mechanical symphony of justice delayed but not denied. Camera flashes illuminate medieval tapestries as photographers record evidence that will expose Denmark's collaboration to international scrutiny, while stenographers transcribe testimony that reveals the scope of systematic betrayal extending throughout Scandinavian reconstruction efforts. Colonel Fortinbras moves through the organized chaos with the methodical precision of someone who spent 3 years documenting Nazi atrocities across occupied Norway. His weathered face shows the grim satisfaction of a professional investigator finally given resources adequate to the scale of the crimes being exposed. Around him, Allied personnel process evidence with the efficiency of men who understand that justice delayed becomes justice denied. The Valkyrie network operated in 17 countries. He reports to the assembled investigators, spreading a map of Europe across a table that once hosted diplomatic negotiations with German officials. Denmark served as the coordination center, but similar operations functioned throughout liberated territories. "We estimate over 3,000 war criminals received new identities and safe passage to South America." The scope of the conspiracy dwarfs anything previously imagined. Not isolated instances of individual collaboration but systematic programs that transformed Allied victory into administrative continuity for Nazi personnel. Red pins on the map mark locations where former SS officers now work as technical advisors. Gestapo interrogators serve as police consultants, and concentration camp administrators apply their expertise to refugee management. Hamlet stands at the window overlooking the Sound, watching Danish fishing boats return with catches that will feed families whose loved ones died, fighting the same men now living comfortably under assumed names throughout the Western Hemisphere. The irony cuts deeper than winter wind. Denmark's fishermen risk their lives daily to provide sustenance for a nation that provided sanctuary to those who would have enslaved or murdered them. "Your testimony will be crucial," Rosencrantz says, approaching with legal documents that transform personal tragedy into historical record. "The evidence your commission gathered provides the foundation for prosecuting collaboration networks throughout Europe. But testimony from Major Kronborg's son carries special weight, personal witness to official betrayal." The observation strikes Hamlet with the weight of unwanted responsibility. His father's murder becomes not just family tragedy but international incident. His mother's confession transforms from private shame into public evidence, and his quest for personal justice evolves into testimony that will reshape post-war European politics. Through the castle's ancient corridors comes the sound of additional personnel arriving, Allied military police escorting Danish officials whose names appeared in Gertrude's files, investigators carrying boxes of evidence seized from government offices throughout Copenhagen, and journalists whose dispatches will carry news of Denmark's reckoning to newspapers throughout the Western world. Minister Voltemund arrived 20 minutes ago. Horatio reports, consulting notes scrawled during the evening's rapidly developing events. He's claiming diplomatic immunity and demanding transport to the Swedish embassy. Claims the entire investigation represents communist infiltration of Allied intelligence services. The accusation represents the network's final desperate strategy, painting exposure as Soviet subversion rather than Allied justice, transforming war crimes prosecution into Cold War politics. The tactic might have succeeded weeks earlier, but the scope of evidence now available makes denial impossible, even for politicians skilled in creative interpretation. "Let him claim whatever he wants," Colonel Fortinbras replies grimly. "We have financial records showing payments to SS officers totaling over 12 million Swiss francs. Bank transfers, property deeds, travel documents, every transaction documented with Germanic precision by men who never imagined their bookkeeping would become evidence in war crimes trials." The Allied team works with methodical efficiency that reflects months of preparation for this moment. Across the Great Hall, investigators organize evidence into categories that will support prosecutions throughout Europe: financial crimes, conspiracy charges, accessory to murder allegations, and treason cases that will reshape the legal definition of collaboration. Dr. Voltimand enters the hall carrying medical files that add forensic weight to testimonial evidence. His presence transforms the investigation from political prosecution into scientific documentation, providing physical proof to support witness statements that might otherwise be dismissed as partisan accusations. 14 confirmed murders, he reports to the assembled investigators, his voice carrying the clinical precision that makes medical testimony particularly compelling in criminal proceedings. All witnesses connected to the Truth Commission's investigation, all killed using techniques consistent with Gestapo training protocols. The pattern suggests coordination by personnel with professional experience in elimination operations. The revelation confirms what everyone suspected, but no one could prove. The Valkyrie network's response to exposure included systematic assassination of witnesses, transforming Denmark's pursuit of justice into a war fought with bullets and bombs rather than testimony and trials. "There's more," Dr. Voltimand continues, producing photographs that show details too graphic for civilian audiences but necessary for legal proceedings. Several victims showed evidence of advanced interrogation techniques before execution. They were tortured for information about investigation procedures, witness lists, and evidence locations. The systematic nature of the murders reveals an organization that operated with military discipline and intelligence resources, confirming suspicions that the network represented more than criminal conspiracy. It constituted a shadow government that administered Denmark's collaboration with the same efficiency once applied to Nazi occupation policies. Through the castle's tall windows, the lights of Copenhagen reflect off snow-covered ground, creating a winter landscape that speaks to Denmark's current isolation from the community of nations that assumed liberation had restored moral order to Scandinavian politics. Those lights represent millions of Danish citizens who must now confront their nation's systematic betrayal of its own liberation. "The international implications are staggering," Rosenkrantz observes, studying cables from Allied intelligence services throughout Europe. "Every liberated territory will face questions about collaboration networks. Every reconstruction program will be examined for Nazi infiltration. The entire post-war settlement could be destabilized by what we've uncovered here. The scope of necessary investigation threatens to overwhelm Allied resources already strained by occupation duties in Germany and emerging Cold War tensions with Soviet forces. Exposing the Valkyrie network opens questions about Western European reconstruction that no Allied government wants to confront while facing Soviet expansion in Eastern Europe." "The Norwegian network was eliminated last month," Colonel Fortinbras adds, his voice heavy with the knowledge that Denmark's situation is not unique. 17 former Wehrmacht officers serving as military advisors, 12 SS personnel working in refugee administration, and over 50 cases of war criminals receiving government positions under false identities. The pattern extends beyond coincidence into systematic policy. Allied governments throughout Western Europe recruited former Nazi officials for their technical expertise, while providing protection from war crimes prosecution. The Valkyrie network represents not aberration but implementation of strategies designed to utilize German administrative experience for democratic reconstruction. Hamlet turns from the window to face the assembled investigators, understanding that his role extends beyond personal testimony to national confession. His father's murder has become the opening through which Denmark's collaboration will be exposed to international scrutiny, his family's tragedy transformed into evidence of institutional betrayal. What happens to Denmark now? He asks, the question carrying both personal and political implications. What happens to a democracy that discovers its liberation was administered by the same people who organized its occupation? The silence that follows suggests that Allied investigators have documentation for crimes, but few answers for consequences. Denmark's collaboration represents more than legal violations. It challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of Allied victory and the possibility of moral restoration following systematic evil. Outside, the December wind continues to howl across the Sound, carrying with it the sound of change that will transform Denmark from comfortable victim of Nazi occupation into uncomfortable participant in post-war moral compromise. The investigation that began with one man's quest for justice has revealed systematic betrayal that extends throughout Western European reconstruction efforts. 3 months after the Elsinore revelations, Copenhagen wears the gray pallor of a city learning to live with unwelcome knowledge about itself. The spring of 1947 arrives reluctantly, as if the season itself hesitates to bring renewal to a nation that discovered its liberation was incomplete. Danish flags still fly at half-mast from government buildings, not in mourning for the dead, but in acknowledgement of ideals that died without proper burial during 5 years of moral compromise. The International War Crimes Tribunal occupies the Copenhagen City Hall, its chambers filled with translators, stenographers, and lawyers building cases that will reshape European understanding of collaboration and resistance. The proceedings unfold with judicial precision, each day revealing new details of systematic betrayal that extends throughout Western European reconstruction efforts. Hamlet testifies from the witness stand with the steady voice of someone who has learned that truth requires no embellishment to be devastating. His words carry across the crowded courtroom to journalists whose dispatches will carry Denmark's shame to newspapers throughout the world, transforming personal tragedy into historical record. My father discovered that Danish provisional government officials were facilitating the escape of war criminals in exchange for gold looted from occupied territories, he states, his testimony supported by exhibits that fill evidence tables with photographs, documents, and financial records. His murder was ordered by those he trusted most, his own brother and his own wife. In the defendants section, Gertrude sits beside other accused collaborators, her elegant appearance incongruous with the orange prison jumpsuit that identifies her as someone awaiting judgment for crimes against humanity. Her face shows the hollow exhaustion of someone who spent months watching comfortable lies crumble under the weight of documented truth. The courtroom gallery includes faces that represent Denmark's moral spectrum resistance fighters whose sacrifice enabled the investigation, families whose loved ones died while their killers lived comfortably under false names, and citizens whose comfortable assumptions about Danish heroism have been shattered by revelations of systematic collaboration. The defendant Gertrude Kronborg, the chief prosecutor, continues, addressing the international panel of judges with evidence that speaks to premeditation rather than wartime desperation, participated in financial operations that enabled over 400 war criminals to escape justice. Her signature appears on documents authorizing payments to former SS officers, property transfers to wanted fugitives, and currency exchanges that laundered gold stolen from Holocaust victims. The charges echo through the courtroom with the weight of systematic evil documented with scientific precision. Each count represents not just legal violation but moral abandonment, the transformation of Danish liberation into another form of Nazi administration, managed by more sophisticated collaborators. Through the courtroom's tall windows, Copenhagen's harbor is visible where Allied ships now dock beside Danish vessels, the international presence serving as both protection and implicit acknowledgement that Denmark cannot police its own war crimes without foreign supervision. The site represents national humiliation tempered by the possibility of eventual moral restoration. Your Honor, the defense attorney argues with the desperate eloquence of someone defending the indefensible. My client's actions must be understood within the context of wartime survival. Every decision she made was designed to protect her family and ensure Danish national continuity through the darkest period in our history. The justification rings hollow in a courtroom filled with evidence of systematic murder, theft, and betrayal disguised as administrative efficiency. Beside Gertrude sit 12 other defendants whose cases reveal the scope of the Valkyrie network's operations. Danish officials who provided false identities, bank executives who laundered stolen gold, and military officers who facilitated war criminal transportation. Colonel Fortinbras rises from the prosecution table with documents that represent 3 months of investigation throughout Scandinavia. His testimony transforms Danish collaboration from isolated incident into continental conspiracy, revealing networks that operated from Norway to France, with coordination that suggests official Allied tolerance, if not active support. The evidence demonstrates systematic infiltration of democratic institutions by former Nazi personnel, he states, his Norwegian accent lending weight to accusations that extend beyond Danish borders. Liberation was incomplete because the Allies prioritized technical expertise over moral accountability, allowing war criminals to escape justice in exchange for cooperation with Western strategic interests. The broader implications strike the courtroom like artillery fire, not just Danish collaboration, but Allied complicity in transforming victory over fascism into administrative continuity for fascist personnel. The investigation that began with one man's quest for personal justice has revealed institutional betrayal that challenges fundamental assumptions about post-war European reconstruction. The tribunal recognizes that the defendants' actions occurred within a broader context of international policy failures. The chief judge acknowledges, his words carrying implications that extend far beyond this Copenhagen courtroom. However, individual moral responsibility cannot be absolved by institutional pressures. Justice requires accountability from those who chose collaboration over resistance. The verdict arrives with the finality of history rendered into legal language guilty verdicts for all major defendants. Sentences ranging from execution for those who participated directly in murder to imprisonment for financial conspirators. Gertrude receives 15 years for accessory to multiple homicides and financial crimes against humanity. As the defendants are led away, Hamlet feels no satisfaction in his mother's conviction, only the hollow completion that comes from duty fulfilled at enormous personal cost. The justice he sought for his father has been delivered, but at the price of destroying his family and exposing his nation's systematic betrayal of its own liberation. Outside the courthouse, Copenhagen's citizens gather in small groups, discussing revelations that have transformed their understanding of recent history. Some faces show anger at those who betrayed Danish resistance, while others display the confusion of people discovering that moral complexity admits no easy answers about survival and collaboration. Denmark will recover, Ophelia says, joining Hamlet on the courthouse steps where Danish and Allied flags snap in the spring wind. Her role as chief archivist for the Truth Commission has aged her beyond her years, but her voice carries the quiet confidence of someone who survived both Nazi occupation and its aftermath. Recovery requires more than trials and convictions, Hamlet replies, watching as Danish police escort convicted collaborators toward prison transport. Denmark must learn to live with knowledge about what it allowed to happen, what it participated in, and what it chose to ignore. The process will take years, perhaps decades. Denmark rebuilding its national character on foundations that acknowledge collaboration as well as resistance, moral failure as well as heroic sacrifice. The comfortable mythology of universal Danish opposition to Nazi occupation has been replaced by more complex truth about accommodation, survival, and the prices that decent people pay when faced with impossible choices. In the harbor, Allied ships prepare to depart, as Denmark resumes responsibility for its own justice system, its own moral reckoning, and its own future as a democracy that learned the hard way that liberation requires constant vigilance against those who would corrupt it from within. The evening sun breaks through Copenhagen's gray clouds for the first time in months, casting golden light across a city, beginning the long process of earning its freedom through acknowledgement of truth rather than comfortable denial. Denmark's real liberation has finally begun, not through military victory but through moral courage to confront the full cost of its survival. Hamlet walks through the streets, where Danish flags now fly at full height, their colors bright against buildings that remember both heroism and collaboration. His father's murder has been avenged, his country's betrayal exposed, and justice delivered to those who thought themselves beyond its reach. The Denmark that emerges from this reckoning will be different, smaller perhaps, but more honest. A nation that understands that freedom must be defended not just against foreign enemies, but against domestic corruption, not just through military resistance, but through moral courage to confront uncomfortable truths about the prices of survival and the costs of compromise. In the distance, church bells toll across Copenhagen, their bronze voices carrying across a city that has learned to distinguish between liberation and freedom, between survival and honor, between the democracy it inherited and the democracy it must earn through generations of vigilant truth-telling.